Today on Stock Charts in Focus, we're showing you how to boost your sector analysis routines using ChartLists. I'm going to reach into my own personal toolkit, show you some of the lists that I use to track and analyze the sectors of the market in two different flavors, the traditional cap weight flavor, but also in the equal weight format. And we're going to do this in ACP. We're going to do this in Sharp Charts. We're even going to show you how you can use some of the multi-chart layout features in ACP to track these sector views. So lots to cover on today's show. Of course, you know what it is. It's all new. It's all here. It's Stock Charts in Focus. All right, my friends, welcome to another edition of Stock Charts in Focus. Of course, our product focus show here on Stock Charts TV, where we dig into the site, dive into the features, show you around the tools, and help you get more value out of everything that you have available to you here on StockCharts.com. My name is Grayson Roze, Vice President of Operations here at Stock Charts, and today is going to be a really fun episode. We've been doing this recently, kind of reaching into my own toolkit, showing you some of the tools and features that I use in my own approach to the markets. We're going to do that again on today's episode, talking about sector analysis. I'm actually going to show you some of the chart lists that I use in my own approach to analyzing the sectors of the market. We're going to do this in a couple of different flavors. I actually like to look at the sectors not just in the traditional cap weighted flavor, but also in an equal weight flavor. We can take those sectors, weight them differently, and with ETFs, this is very, very easy to do. So I actually like to track the sectors of the market in those two different weightings, compare and contrast how they're moving together, how they're actually diverging at some points. So lots to cover here as we dig into the chart list features of Sharp Charts and ACP. And also we're going to talk about how the multi-chart layout features in ACP can be helpful here as you're analyzing the sectors. Now, before we get going, I want to mention we're actually going to make all of these lists available to you. So if you're watching this on YouTube, check the link in the description below. We're going to actually have a couple of links down there that allow you to take these lists that I've created, the lists that I use in my own account, and you're actually going to be able to bring those into your Stock Charts account. You're going to be able to save those right to your own account and take this process and really kind of make it your own. So if what we talk about today really resonates, if you want these lists in your accounts, it's going to be really, really easy to do that with those links down in the description below. So with that out of the way, let's get right to it. So we are starting here on the members dashboard, a page that we start on quite a lot. I like to call this the heart and soul of your Stock Charts account. Of course, the first page that you see when you log in. Now today we're talking about ChartList. We actually did a sort of a deep dive on some chart lists last week, and we've done this on the show in the past. But the dashboard is a great place to go to see all of your chart lists. If you come here and you give this little button a click, that's going to bring you right down to all of the chart lists that you have in your account. So this is a great resource if you are not currently using this, a great way to kind of see all of your chart lists in one place. Now, what we're talking about today, again, kind of reaching into my own toolkit, talking about some of the lists that I use in my own approach to the market. We're going to be talking about these sector lists down here. You can see that I have these labeled as daily because these are actually lists that I look at pretty much every day. These are part of my daily routines. My daily routines really start up here with this market evaluation list, and I work my way down through all of these views, all the way down into the US industry groups. Today, though, what we're going to be looking at are these daily routine US sector lists. And as you can see, we've got a couple of lists to cover on today's show. So the first one that we're going to look at is the US sectors, the 11 S&P sectors of the market. We're going to look at those in the traditional cap weighted flavor. I like to say flavor. You could think of it in a couple of different ways, but spices it up a little bit, calling it a flavor. But the US sectors that most of us reference, things like XLK, XLY, XLE, all of those sectors of the market, those are sector ETFs, and they're all cap weighted. So the larger companies in those groups have a higher weighting. We can also think, though, about those same sectors of the market in an equal weight flavor, where all of the companies have the same weight. So that takes out sort of the market cap bias that you have inherently in some of those standard, like I said, traditional cap weighted sector ETFs. So I've actually got a separate list with all of the equal weight sectors. And then we've got a couple of other lists to dive into as well. I've got a weighting comparison list, which will show, that shows basically how the traditional cap weighted sector is moving relative to the equal weighted sector. So a fun one there to kind of compare and contrast within those different sectors. And then we have everything in a combined group, which makes it easy to sort of put everything together, compare scooter values, see all the charts at once. And when we get over to ACP, you'll see how that is incredibly beneficial, especially for using the multi-chart layout features. So this organization, I wanted to kind of put this up on the screen, make sure that you're aware of how we're going to go through this. And again, like I said, all of these these 4 lists are going to be available to you in the description below. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can actually click those links and bring these lists right into your own account. Really, really easy. From there, you can start to apply your own chart styles. You can start to modify any of these things. But if you're interested in getting kind of the structure of these lists, you can do that with those links that we have in the description below. So let's jump into the standard US sectors view, and we're going to jump over to the summary page, show you what this looks like. So within these lists, what I've done, again, I've put the 11 S&P sector ETFs in this list. Now I've also put in SPY, which is the S&P 500 itself. I add that to this list because when I'm sorting here, when I'm looking at percent changes over time, when I'm looking at things like, for instance, scooter value, that's our StockCharts technical rank, I can actually compare how these sectors are moving relative to the S&P 500 itself. So for instance, if I sort this by scooter, you can see that because I have that S&P 500 ETF in here, in addition to the sectors, that makes it really easy to see which ones have a higher scooter score than the S&P 500. In this case, financials, real estate, materials, and healthcare, 4 of the strongest sectors right now. And that's really easy to see with our StockCharts technical rank, comparing that to the S&P 500 itself. And then I can see everything that is below the S&P 500 itself. So in this case, industrials and technology lagging the S&P 500 a little bit from a scooter perspective. We've got energy has really dropped down to the bottom, and consumer discretionary a little bit weaker as well. So when I create these lists, though, the key is that I've actually put the S&P 500 in here in addition to the sectors. It makes it really easy to kind of compare things to that broader benchmark. And when we do things, for instance, like switch the period here to be 1 week, we can actually compare, again, some of the percentage moves over time. We can actually sort this by percent change. And again, because we've got that S&P 500 ETF in here, we can sort this by percent change. We can see over the last 1 week what the sectors have done, but we can also compare that to what the performance of the S&P 500 itself has been. So in this case, over the last 1 week, we've got materials, staples, financials, utilities, and industrials leading the S&P 500. We can switch this out to be things like 1 month or even 3 months. So if we do that 3-month view, we can see that the leaders have actually been technology, real estate, communication services, and healthcare. So again, by having the S&P 500 in here, it makes it really easy to compare these. Now, the big part of this, though, is actually charting this stuff, not just about the summary view. So we can jump over here to 10 per page, which loads up 10 of these charts all on one page at one time. So again, I've got, with these little stars, I've got the S&P 500 at the top of this list. This is going to be alphabetical. So by putting in these little stars, that makes it sort of load the S&P 500 at the top. So that's going to be the first one that we see. So here, I'm just trying to get a sense of what the S&P 500 is doing overall. In this case, we're looking at a relative strength line with the S&P 500 versus VTI. That's the Vanguard Total Index, so the total U.S. stock market. We can see that for the last couple of months, the S&P 500 has really been outperforming VTI, which is good if you are buying the S&P 500, if you're buying SPY. We can get a chart here of the S&P 500, see that strong trend that we've seen throughout 2021. So this is kind of a great starting place for this list. I can see what the S&P 500 itself is doing. But from there, we jump into the important charts in this list. Now we're looking at the actual S&P sectors themselves. Now these charts look very similar. They're all one-year charts, but I've changed one little detail from that chart up above. In this case, here is that same relative strength line, but instead of benchmarking against VTI, the total index, I want to benchmark against the S&P 500 because, again, in that summary view, we were comparing and contrasting how the sectors are doing, not just to each other, but also to the S&P 500 itself. So here, I've gone ahead and changed that relative strength line to actually be whatever the sector is, whatever the main chart is, main symbol is, versus the S&P 500 instead of VTI. So in this case, we can get a sense of how these different sectors are performing relative to the S&P 500. Now we can see, for instance, here, communication services, XLC, a beautifully strong trend here, especially in 2021. But from a relative strength standpoint, did have a nice run up kind of at the start of the year, but actually since that kind of March high of this relative strength line has really kind of been underperforming the S&P 500 overall, kind of matching the performance, really kind of drifting sideways. So the point here is not actually in today's episode to really dive into the sectors and talk about positioning. This isn't really analysis here. We're talking about how to use the tools and how these can be incorporated into your own process and your own approach to the market. So here, what we can see though, is I've got these relative strength lines to compare the sector that I'm looking at to the S&P 500. Then I've got that chart itself. This is the type of chart that I like to look at. I've got a whole bunch of moving averages on here. I like to really kind of highlight the moving averages that are most important to me. So you actually see that I have the 20 period EMA kind of grayed out a little bit, sort of dulled down, and it's actually a dashed line. I've got the 50-day in sort of bold, thick red, and I've got the 200-day in bold, thick green. But those other moving averages that I have, the 20 period EMA, the 100 period simple moving average, and then also the 400 period simple moving averages, those are all kind of grayed out. I've got the RSI on these charts. I've got accumulation distribution and on balance volume to track kind of money flow into these different sectors. I've got both of those actually in the same panel because I like to kind of watch those together. And then, just like we were looking at in that summary view, I've got the scooter score down at the bottom of all these charts. So all of the charts in this list are all the exact same, with the one exception of that S&P 500 chart, which is tracking the relative strength versus VTI instead of the S&P 500. Makes sense. But I can start to go through all of these charts for all of these different sectors in one simple to use, very convenient kind of place. So I've got everything just kind of stacked on top. And so as I'm going through my daily routine, I can track this really easily. We can jump into XLY here. Now we're looking at consumer discretionary. We can see one that has been, again, according to that relative strength line, really underperforming the S&P 500 for months now. Even though this fund has been ticking higher, even though the sector has been moving higher overall, from a relative perspective, it's actually been underperforming. So again, I've got all these charts stacked on top of each other. I can start to go through all of the sectors with this exact same chart style. I could add annotations. So for instance, here I was looking at energy kind of drifting sideways in this consolidation pattern, got a little bit oversold here and has actually been bouncing off the bottom of that range after getting into oversold territory there. So I can add annotations to these charts as well. You can actually do that simply by coming up to this actions menu, hitting annotate, and you can add these annotations to these charts right here from the 10 per page view. Really easy to do. And I can just continue to watch these every day. Again, here's another annotation that I had on my XLF chart. So I can just keep going through all of these sectors. So by putting all of this in a list, makes it really easy to track from a sort of a summary perspective there on the summary view, looking at that table view, digging into the data a little bit. But then I can pull up things like 10 per page view or Chartbook if I want to look at one at a time. I can even do things like candle glance. I can view all of these at once on one single page. So here I can get these little mini charts of what the S&P 500 is doing and then all of the other 11 sector ETFs. So by creating this list, having this, it makes it really easy to review the sectors of the market every single day. Now, we've covered the traditional cap weighted list that I have. So, this is the view that a lot of people traditionally use, the view that a lot of people reference, these cap weighted sectors. But like I said, we can also think about these sectors not just in that cap-weighted flavor, but also in the equal-weighted flavor. We can take out that market cap bias that sort of drags these higher, because when you have huge stocks in some of these, like Tesla and Home Depot, for instance, in the consumer discretionary group, those outsized stocks, those huge stocks in those different groups, they do drag the sectors around in different ways. So we can also jump over to an equal-weighted view of these sectors, sort of balance everything out and take out that cap weighted bias. So I do that by creating a second list. I've got, again, a US sectors list, but you'll see this one has a equal weight label. So when I click over to that, now we're looking at a list that looks very, very similar. We'll actually sort this by name. We're looking at a list that is very, very similar. Again, we've got the S&P 500, but in this case, we're actually using the equal weighted S&P 500, which is RSP. We've got all of our sectors, our 11 sectors of the market, but all of these are in an equal weight flavor. So we've got that same list, but in a slightly different view. We can do all of the same things that we did before. We can sort this by scooter. We can track what's working, what's not. We can use these performance tools here, switching the time period to something like 3 months. We can track how the equal weight sectors are performing relative to each other or relative to the equal weight S&P 500. And of course, we can also jump over to something like 10 per page. We can do that same view. I can look at all of the same sectors of the market, but in that equal weight flavor. So here we've got our S&P 500, but in equal weight. Again, we're comparing this one to VTI. So we can see that from an equal weight perspective, the S&P 500 is actually starting to outperform the total market a little bit, but has been lagging over the last couple of months. Moving higher nicely now, though, and kind of breaking out of this consolidation range. So we can track, again, this different flavor of the S&P 500 in this list. We can start to go down through this. Now we're looking at the equal weight sectors, charts for all of the equal weight sectors. And we're doing this in the same way here. We're tracking this versus the S&P 500. But instead of tracking this versus the cap-weighted S&P 500, I've actually set these charts up so that I'm tracking the equal weight sector versus the equal weight S&P 500. So you can see that here with the verbose legends turned on. You can actually read that right there, S&P 500 equal weight ETF. So similar concept, I can start to go through all of these charts for all of these different equal weight sectors, and I can compare that to what I was seeing on the list before with the cap-weighted sectors. So the same thing goes. We're not going to run through all of these for the sake of time, but exactly the same thing. And this probably looks very, very similar because these charts are almost the exact same, with the one exception of kind of what we're benchmarking here in this relative strength line up at the top. So that allows me, again, to dive into the sectors from that cap-weighted perspective, then dig into them from the equal weight perspective. And then I might want to start comparing those a little bit more directly. So I've actually got a list that I call my weighting comparison. That's the next list that we're going to look at. Here, we're actually on 10 per page view still, so we'll just flip right to the charts. I'm going to skip that summary view for now. Here, we're kind of putting everything together onto one chart. We're putting both of those different flavors for each sort of part of the market that we're looking at, each sector of the market that we're looking at, putting it all onto one chart. So we start actually again with our S&P 500 chart. And here we're looking at a couple of different things. We'll start in the middle of this chart. The middle of this chart has both the equal weight S&P 500 and the cap weight S&P 500 on a performance scale. So this is looking at over the last year, how have these performed purely on a percentage view. You'll notice that this is just a line chart. We're not looking at candlesticks. We got no moving averages on here. We're just looking at the percentage gain or loss from the S&P 500 in those two flavors. So here we've got the equal weight in black and we've got the cap weight in blue for all of these charts. That's going to hold true for all of the sectors as well as we get into it. So here we can see that the black line, which is that RSP equal weight S&P 500, is actually up quite a bit more than the standard or the traditional cap-weighted S&P 500. So we can see those sort of percentage returns right there. Then at the top, we're actually comparing both of those to VTI. So when we looked at those sector lists before, remember that the first chart that we looked at was always for the S&P 500, and we were benchmarking that against VTI, the Vanguard Total Index, the total US stock market. So here I've just combined those relative strength lines into one panel at the top of this chart. So we're looking at RSP versus VTI, equal weight versus VTI, and we're looking at the cap weight S&P 500 versus VTI. Again, we can see that the equal weight S&P 500 has actually been outperforming the total market over the last year, while the cap weighted S&P 500 has actually underperformed by a little bit. Now, at the bottom, we're actually comparing the two flavors to each other. So here we have RSP versus SPY, so equal weight versus cap weight. So this allows us to compare on this chart, how is the equal weight S&P 500 doing versus the cap weighted S&P 500. We can see that on the first part of this chart, the equal weighted index was actually heavily outperforming the cap weighted index. That sort of started to slip here over the summer months, June, July. But at the start of August here, we started to tick up, and now we've actually got that equal weight S&P 500 starting to outperform the cap weighted index once again. So we can compare and contrast that little view, those performances here, with what I call my weighting comparison charts. Now, we've dug into this for the S&P 500. We can do the exact same thing for all of the sectors. So here, we're looking at communication services, as you can see. Again, the black is always going to be the equal weight, and the blue is always going to be the cap weight. So here, we're looking at the percentage return of the equal weight communication services fund, communication services sector. That's the black line here. And we can see that over the last year, that equal weight communication services has actually outperformed the cap weighted communication services XLC just by a little bit, not by a ton, but by a little bit. It's been a little bit more volatile too. That's been interesting to see. So we can compare those percentage returns. We can do the same thing here, and I've switched it again to be benchmark versus SPY. So here we've got our equal weight sector, equal weight communication services versus the S&P 500. And then we have the cap weighted communication services XLC versus the S&P 500. So we've got those combined relative strength lines here in the panel up top. And then again, down below, we've got the equal weighted sector versus the cap weighted sector. So I've done this, I've set this up actually for all of these different sectors. So we've got communication services here, we've got consumer discretionary here. And so after I've gone through the individual charts for these sectors, I can actually jump over to this weighting comparison view and start to compare the performances a little bit more directly. Instead of kind of thinking about them as separate charts, I can actually put everything together into one view and really kind of dig into the performances of equal weight versus cap weight for each of these sectors. So we can go all the way through this. We've got consumer staples up next. We've got energy up next. Now, these generally track pretty closely together. So for instance, you can see energy tracking pretty closely together. But for some of those groups, for instance, consumer discretionary, one that has much more of sort of a market cap bias, you've got some huge stocks in that index that really kind of drag the cap weighted flavor around a little bit more. So it's always interesting to kind of see these differences between some of the sectors, see when they're moving together, see when they're kind of diverging from each other, and kind of think about this really from a breadth perspective. Ultimately, that's what we're doing with some of these views. We're kind of trying to think about sector breadth in a different way, tracking sort of the participation further down the cap tiers into those sectors. So that's kind of what we're doing, especially with this weighting comparison view. So we can go all the way through this. I've got all of these charts set up for all of these different sectors. Here we're looking at financials. We can jump into healthcare, jump down into industrials, and I can just kind of slowly go through this every day and digest this, again, relative to what I was seeing on those first couple of lists. So that is our third list that we have to cover. Now we're going to jump back up to the top, and we're going to briefly touch on one that is our fourth list. This is our combined list, but we're really going to cover this actually in ACP because I want to show you some of the multi-chart layout features over there and how those can apply to this sector analysis. So here in the combined list, we'll actually flip back over to the summary page. And you can see what I've done is I've taken those separate lists and combined them into one. Makes sense based on the name. But what we have here is the cap-weighted S&P 500 and the equal-weighted S&P 500 up top. I've got separate charts for those. And then I've got those separate charts for the cap-weighted and equal-weight sectors all the way down the list. So all 11 sectors, I've got both flavors combined into one list. Now again, I can use this summary view here in sort of the Sharp Charts world to sort by the scooter rank. I can sort by percentage changes, anything like that, and I can start to actually compare some of those sort of summary data-oriented views for the cap-weighted and equal-weighted sectors, as well as the S&P 500 in cap weight or equal weight. So by combining everything into one, makes it kind of easy to compare and contrast here in a more of a data view. Now for this specific list, I don't use the Sharp Charts as much, but as we're going to show you in just a second, I use this list actually more often in ACP, where I can put both charts up on the screen together using a multi-chart layout. So again, this is the fourth list. We'll jump over to ACP in just a second and show you how this one can really start to fly over there. But I want to mention, again, we're actually going to make all of these lists available to you. So you don't have to go recreating all of this yourself. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can check the link in the description below. We've got actually 4 links for each of these charts. That's going to give you all of the SharpCharts chart lists. You can store those in your own account, and then you can actually bring them into ACP as well. I'll show you that in just a second. But if you're watching this and you're saying, wow, I'd love to have these in my own account, we've made it really easy with those 4 links. You can click those and save these into your own account, have these lists right there for you. Start to modify them, start to build in your own indicators, your own sector views, anything that you want to do with them. But these will be kind of great jumping off points, hopefully, for you when you bring them into your own account. So we are going to jump back over to the dashboard. We're actually going to launch ACP. Now, in ACP, I've done the exact same thing. I've created these same lists for the sectors in cap weight and equal weight flavor. I've also got that weighting comparison list, and I've got the combined list, which is really what we're going to show off today. Before we do that though, I want to mention to everyone, when you come to ACP and you open up the chart list panel, which you can do simply by clicking this button here at the top right corner, open up that chart list panel, you'll notice that you have a little tab at the top that says SharpCharts. So when you click that, this menu will actually change, and you now have all of your SharpCharts chart lists available to you here in ACP. When you load up any of those SharpCharts chart lists and you give this a click, it's going to load in basically an ACP version of the saved Sharp chart that you have from that list. So if you have a whole bunch of SharpCharts chart lists and you're wondering how you can sort of get set up in ACP, start using that new advanced charting platform, the interactive advanced charting platform, we've actually made that pretty easy here. You don't have to go recreating all of your work. You can simply load up a SharpCharts chart list, start to flip through some of those charts here in ACP. And if you do want to save that as an ACP chart list, you can actually do that at the bottom of this panel as well. Hit Save as ACP chart list, and that'll actually kind of recreate it here in the ACP world. They are a little bit separate, but that's a great way that we've kind of connected them, made it really easy to bring your SharpCharts work over to ACP. So here in ACP though, what we're going to talk about, again, I've set up all of these chart lists the exact same way. So I've actually got my daily US sectors list right here. These are all of the cap weighted sectors. I've got my equal weight US sectors list. Here you can see RSP, and then down into all of those individual sectors, but in that equal weight flavor. And then down below that, I've got my weighting comparison list where I've got very similar charts set up here in ACP. What we're going to talk about though is this last list. This is actually where I like to chart this list here in ACP, because there's an interesting thing that I can do with these multi-chart layouts in ACP. So here we've got, again, that combined list, which takes the cap weighted sectors and the equal weighted sectors, puts them into one chart list. We've also got the S&P 500 in cap weight flavor, and we've got the S&P 500 in equal weight flavor. So what I can do is click here on SPY. That's going to load up this chart. And now I can actually hold down Shift and click RSP. That's going to open up a second chart right next to it. When you hold down Shift and click something from one of these lists, it'll open that chart, that symbol, in another chart window. So I'm going to close this down to give us a little bit more space. But as you probably know, here in ACP, you can create these multi-chart layouts just like this, up to 12 charts on the screen at once. So really a lot to cover there. We've actually done a couple of episodes of In Focus on this topic specifically. So you should go check those out, look for those on YouTube. We're not going to cover all of that today. But here, what you can see is that because we've opened up this second chart right next to it, we've now got the S&P 500 here in cap weighted flavor, and then we've got the S&P 500 in equal weighted flavor. Now I'm going to open up this range menu. I've got apply to all checked, so anything that I select in this menu is going to apply to all of the charts on the screen. So I can actually click here, change these both to be 1 year charts. And now I've got these right next to each other. So what this allows me to do is really compare the charts directly. Again, I've got that weighting comparison view that I like to do that kind of brings in those performance views and some of the relative strength. But here in ACP, I can actually put these charts up right next to each other and really compare and contrast the differences. So we can see, again, that's a strong trend in the S&P 500. We can see that the equal weight S&P 500 actually has been going sideways for the last couple of months, but is starting to break out again to the upside. So we can start to really see these things kind of right next to each other. And the power of ACP, the power of these multi-chart layouts and chart lists, is that I can actually turn on what we call multi-chart mode and flip through this chart list really easily with this up on the screen. So to turn on multi-chart mode, I've got my sidebar open to the chart lists. I'm going to click this little layout icon to view this in the current layout. So when I turn that on, you'll see that we've got actually two things highlighted here in blue. It's pretty subtle. The thicker highlight represents our active chart. So in this case, the one with the green border around it gets that thicker blue border over here. But RSP, because that's also up on the screen, gets a subtle little blue background there as well. Now, what I really want to do with this view, again, is compare the cap weight versus the equal weight. So here we're looking at it for the S&P 500. We've got cap weight on the left. We've got equal weight on the right. And so using the multi-chart layout feature in ACP, turning this on, I can actually turn this on, give that a click, and now I can flip through this list and compare the cap weighted sector versus the equal weighted sector. So when I click next, you'll see that we jump down to the next two charts in this list, which in this case is communication services. We've got XLC and we've got communication services in that equal weighted flavor, EWCO. So because I've set these up with both charts on the screen, I've turned on that multi-chart mode, I can now just click these arrows to flip through the sectors. And because there are two of them and I've got two charts up on the screen, I can just sort of flip through this combined list and really start to compare equal weight versus cap weight. So I've got both of those up on the screen at once, makes it really easy to compare this. Now, this is a great reason why, a great example actually of why this is a fun view. Here we're looking at the same sector, communication services, but again, in cap weight versus equal weight. We can see that communication services in the cap weighted flavor, which we have over on the left, has been a steady trender, moving higher, really kind of bouncing off that 50-day moving average for months now. But when we think about that in the equal weight flavor, we can see right here that this has actually been drifting sideways. We've got a very sideways 50-day moving average that we've been kind of chopping around. And so by putting these charts up on the screen together, side by side, it makes it really easy to see these kinds of things and think about the sectors in this way, comparing cap weight versus equal weight. So again, we can just start to flip through this. We can click that little arrow button again. Now we're looking at consumer discretionary cap weight versus consumer discretionary equal weight. Again, we've got something kind of similar, has been moving higher, mostly higher here in the XLY cap weighted consumer discretionary, but in the equal weight flavor, really drifting sideways for many months. So this view here in ACP allows me to kind of take what I'm seeing on those separate charts, take what I'm seeing on those weighting comparison charts as well, and really put them up on the screen together in one powerful view. And again, because we've got this multi-chart mode turned on, it makes it really easy to just kind of flip through these charts. If I wanted to put even more up on the screen, whatever sort of number of charts I put up on the screen, that's what we're going to sort of fill in from this list. So if we had 4 charts up on the screen and we clicked this multi-chart mode and then clicked something from this list, it would pull in the first 4 charts in the list instead of just the first 2. So that's kind of how that works, by the way. But here, for these sectors specifically, I've found that in ACP, this view, this use of these multi-chart modes is incredibly powerful, being able to compare these sectors, again, in cap weight versus equal weight flavor. So really easy to set up here. And again, we're going to make these lists available to you. If you're watching on YouTube, check that link in the description below. You can actually save those as Sharp Charts chart lists. Makes it easy to use them in that world. But again, because you've got this option to bring over your Sharp Charts chart lists from sort of outside of ACP, you can bring those right in here, save that as an ACP chart list, and do exactly what I'm doing right here. You can see these in exactly the same way. So it makes it really easy to get set up here in ACP, again, with this kind of sector view. So I know we covered a ton on today's show, but hopefully you're gonna have some fun playing around with these kind of takeaways. You've got some lists to go play around with this weekend for cap weighted sectors and equal weighted sectors. So much fun to kind of reach into my own toolkit, show you how I do this. Again, this is part of my daily process, something that I do every day, just kind of flipping through the sectors and seeing what's happening beneath the surface. It's not just about that index level. We're actually drilling into kind of the next level down. And by bringing in the equal weight view as well, again, we're kind of stepping beyond that cap weighted bias that we get, especially in some of those sectors like consumer discretionary, even technology, things like that, where we really have those kind of huge players in those sectors. by looking at those sectors in that equal weight view, we can really start to kind of step beyond that cap weight bias and see what's going on a little bit deeper beneath the surface. Again, kind of with breadth in mind. That's effectively what we're doing here, is thinking about sector breadth in kind of a different way. So hopefully you've had some fun seeing sort of how I like to walk through the sectors. We've got many other tools as well. Our sector summary tool, of course, we've got things like candle glance, which we briefly showed off, where you can see everything kind of in one view in the sharp charts world. Of course, we've got RRG, a fantastic sector analysis tool. Julius de Kempener does a ton of work on that one, so definitely check out some of his work and check out that RRG tool. That's another great way to view these sectors, see what's working, see what's not. But hopefully this has given you a sense of how I use chart lists to analyze and track and monitor what's happening at the sector level of the market. Combining that with some of these new tools that we have, like the multi-chart mode in ACP, really a powerful view, a powerful part of my process. So hopefully you go get those lists and have some fun playing around this weekend, putting those into your own account and making those your own. I want to thank you again for joining me here on Stock Charts in Focus. Of course, our product focus show, we do this every Friday, 3:30 p.m. Eastern time on StockCharts TV. So if you had fun with me today, join me next week. We'll be back with another edition of Stock Charts in Focus next Friday. My name is Grayson Roze, Vice President of Operations here at StockCharts. It's been great to be with you. I will see you again soon for the next one, but until then, chart on, my friends.
Hey guys, Dave Keller here with StockCharts.com. Thanks so much for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, and we hope you did, hit the like button right below. Also, we have so much new content every day. Consider subscribing to the channel. Just hit the subscribe button in the video or right below. Thanks for watching. Stay safe. Have a fantastic day.